So again, I'm a phytoplankton ecologist. I recently just got my PhD this May. Now I'm a postdoctoral research scientist at the Monteverdi Earth Observatory, just 8 minutes away. I have a kind of non-traditional scientific career path. I was actually an English major as an undergrad. Then I fell into IT consulting for a number of years in the city, and then eventually found my way into marine science and fell in love with phytoplankton, so little single-celled photosynthetic organisms, and got my PhD in that. Some would call me a microbial ecologist, a phytoplankton ecologist. I do a lot of kind of cutting-edge genetic work on phytoplankton. And at Monteverdi, I'm actually transitioning from a freshwater person into a marine person. I'll be actually going out to the ocean and studying ocean-going phytoplankton as well. So pictured here in the back of this slide here, in the background here, is a blue-green algae bloom. This is actually out on the east end of Long Island in Watermill, New York. This little pond has blue-green algae blooms almost every year. They turn the color of the pond this kind of pea green soup color, and a lot of the residents don't like it. So I'm going to be talking to you about blue-green algae, a little bit about every aspect of it. So as some of you guessed, the title of my talk was kind of taken from this song by Joe Raposo, Being Green, sung by Kermit the Frog many years ago. And in the beginning of the song, Kermit's kind of lamenting on his color, saying, oh, I look like everything else. I wish I was red or yellow or maybe sparkly like the water or the stars in the sky. But towards the end of the song, he realizes that being green is actually pretty great. So I kind of structured my talk on that. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the positive aspects of blue-green algae and also some of the negative aspects of blue-green algae as we see them today. So blue-green algae, also called cyanobacteria, are a very ancient group of microorganisms that are thought to have evolved around 2.5 billion years ago. In fact, we can still see remnants of those early cyanobacteria in these stromatolites out in Western Australia. These are actually still living today. Blue-green algae are the first organisms to have evolved the ability to photosynthesize. And that's basically taking carbon dioxide and water with light energy, converting that to food, with a byproduct being oxygen. And this led actually to the oxygenation of the Earth. Thank you. So you can actually thank blue-green algae for your ability to breathe on this planet today. Blue-green algae are found in many different environments. We can find them in soils, freshwater ecosystems, oceanic ecosystems, so salt water, and extreme environments such as deserts, hot springs, and even Antarctica. And in the lower right-hand corner is actually an Antarctic lake with a big blue-green algae bloom occurring in it right now. So they're very hardy, and they can basically colonize almost any ecosystem that we have today. The blue-green algae come in all shapes and sizes. You can see them as single-celled organisms such as Syndicocystis and Syndicocockus. They form these massive colonies. This is thousands of cells in one colony. There we go. They'll form these long filaments, so it's chains of cells, globule aggregations, where they'll excrete like this mucus-like substance to hold them together. And they also exhibit some cell differentiation. That is, along a chain of cells, one cell will change to do a different function, such as heterocyst, which is a site of nitrogen fixation, or actinides, which are resting stages. So the cells will actually form this actinide in order to survive in adverse conditions, such as poor nutrients, cold temperatures, or poor light. Now, blue-green algae also form a wide variety of symbiotic relationships with plants, fungi, sponges, and protists. Some examples of this are the lichen. We see these on trees and rocks. It's actually a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and a cyanobacterium, and this is just a cross-section of what a lichen might be like. And we see them in freshwater sponges. The green here is actually a freshwater blue-green algae. And then in larger plants, such as this cycad, where we have blue-green algae inhabiting the root nodules of that cycad. And what they're doing there is they're actually providing nitrogen for that plant. So let's touch a little bit more on nitrogen. So nitrogen is one of the elements that's really key for the survival of plants, that along with phosphorus. And there's not always a lot out there, and so cyanobacteria play a very key role in providing nitrogen for plants and other organisms. This is just a zoomed-in picture of a freshwater cyanobacterium called Anabaena, and it's showing you the heterocyst. And the way this works for this organism is they'll have these heterocysts where they're actually fixing nitrogen. That feeds the rest of the vegetative cells where they're conducting photosynthesis, and those cells provide food for that nitrogen-fixing cell. They're all the same type of cell, but they've just differentiated a little bit by changing their structure. So talking a little bit more on nitrogen fixation. Currently the atmosphere is made up of, 79% nitrogen gas. There's a lot of nitrogen in the air that we're breathing. In humans, we fix a lot of that nitrogen for fertilizers, but bacteria, such as cyanobacteria, also perform a ton of this nitrogen fixation. That not only is to feed themselves, but also to feed other organisms, and it's for constructing different proteins and other different molecules within the cell. And that creates this whole kind of cycle here of nitrogen moving throughout the earth. Nitrogen fixation is very important for our aquatic ecosystems, such as oceans and freshwater lakes. The way that works is nitrogen gas gets dissolved within the water, and then nitrogen-fixing cyanobacterium or other bacteria will then convert that nitrogen gas into a more usable form of nitrogen, such as ammonia or nitrate or nitrite. And that's used for their growth, but that also keys into the rest of the biosphere, in which larger organisms might feed on that cyanobacterium, might poop it out, and then that feeds some bacteria, which then cycle it back into the ecosystem. We're looking at this on a very global scale on the importance of cyanobacteria for nitrogen fixation. This is a figure I took out of a Nature paper from 2008. And what these authors did is they quantified all the different inputs and exports of nitrogen around the planet. And in orange here is our human influence. So you can see we're pumping in a lot of nitrogen into our ecosystems. But here, and here, is the proportion that's done biotically, so by cyanobacteria and other bacteria. Again, taking nitrogen gas out of the atmosphere, converting it to a more usable form for growth. And if we were to take a marker or an eraser and erase out this orange line, you can see that it's almost balanced, just with the natural nitrogen fixation that's occurring. And the main point being that cyanobacteria and other bacteria are extremely important to the world for providing this nitrogen for growth. So I want everyone to just take a big, deep breath. Come on. Exhale. All right. So that made me feel a little bit more comfortable, but something very important happened. We breathe in oxygen and we exhale carbon dioxide. So remember, cyanobacteria are one of the first organisms to have evolved in the ability to photosynthesize. In this figure here, I'm showing you oxygen in the atmosphere, basically this is PCO, just atmospheric oxygen levels here. This is over time going back about 3.8 billion years ago to present time. And if we were to take a time machine and go back in time to maybe 3.9 billion years ago, we would land into an area where there would be no oxygen in the atmosphere and we probably couldn't breathe. For about 2.5 billion years ago, cyanobacteria came out of the scene. And sometime after that, they evolved the ability to photosynthesize. And we see oxygen levels in the atmosphere begin to rise. And then about 450 million years ago, land plants appeared, and they also were photosynthesizing. And then we see an even larger, let's go back. We see even larger concentrations of oxygen. And what this evolution of the ability to photosynthesize had is it changed the entire chemistry of the planet. We went from a planet where there was no oxygen in the atmosphere to one where there was lots of oxygen in the atmosphere. And subsequently, this caused one of the first extinction events in which all these microorganisms that were going to evolve back in this time suddenly couldn't cope with this higher oxygen levels in the atmosphere and they died. So it fundamentally changed the environment of our planet. Now speaking about those higher plants as well, all higher plants such as trees and shrubs and grasses all actually have a symbiotic cyanobacterium present, and that is in the form of this chloroplast. So the way that happened, scientists believe, is through these two endosymbiotic events, in which in the beginning there is a bacteria which ate another bacteria. That other bacteria that survived in the cell became what's called mitochondria, which is the kind of center for protein production within the cell. And then that new kind of proto-eukaryotic cell, kind of proto-animal type cell, then ate a cyanobacterium. And that cyanobacterium survived within the cell through subsequent divisions and became what's called the chloroplast, which is the site of photosynthetic action. So again, cyanobacteria are everywhere. They're not only just living by themselves, but they're forming these great symbiotic events within our planet. So what about marine blue-green algae? Can anyone pick out any marine blue-green algae within that picture? That's probably true because they're microscopic. We need a microscope, so it's the one I have here to see them. But globally, phytoplankton such as blue-green algae within our oceans and our lakes are extremely important. These are just some pictures of some ocean-going phytoplankton that we study. In fact, they're so important that phytoplankton within our planet produce roughly 50% of the world's oxygen. They're extremely important as the foundation for many aquatic food webs. For instance, they're at the base of the food chain, and they're conducting photosynthesis by turning light energy into food. That feeds into higher trophic units, such as these are copepods, other zooplankton, which then feed fish, which then feed larger fish, and then eventually feed us. Kind of one of the laws of the sea is big things eat little things, and so it makes sense that the phytoplankton are the base of this food chain. So without phytoplankton, we wouldn't have a lot of our the fish that we eat today. Phytoplankton are also extremely important for the CO2 cycle, and as we think about global warming issues, it's thought that phytoplankton have absorbed about 1/3 of the carbon dioxide produced by man to this date. And because of different processes within the ocean, that carbon dioxide that they've absorbed can stay within the ocean for almost 1,000 years, it's thought. So they can be an incredibly important sink of carbon dioxide for these global warming issues that we're experiencing today. And so at the base of the food web, phytoplankton and blue-green algae provide energy and oxygen to marine ecosystems. They remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So they're extremely important for our planet. So how about some of those marine blue-green algae that we're talking about? Well, pictured here is a microscopic image of one very important blue-green algae. It's called Chlorochlorcoccus marinus. This is an electron micrograph of that organism. They're single-celled cyanobacteria, and they're extremely tiny. They're about 0.5 to 0.8 micrometers in diameter. And for scale, that's about, if you were to pluck a hair out of your head, that's about 10 micrometers in diameter, so you could fit almost 20 of those across that's human hair. And for anyone interested in scale, this is a great little website here. On the scale of things, it takes you from the universe all the way down to the smallest known particles known to man. It kind of shows you the relationship of all those different sizes. So this is a rather new species to scientists. It was only discovered in 1986 by Sally Chisholm. Prior to that, we had no idea that they existed. And we're finding out that they're extremely important. For instance, they're responsible for about 20% of the Earth's oxygen production. They're dominant in almost all ecosystems around the globe. If you go into the ocean and take a sample of water, you will find Prochlorococcus present there. And they come in two kind of ecotypes, or two types of cells. One that are adapted to very high light, so sitting at the top of the ocean, and then some ones that are adapted to low light, so maybe about 500 meters or 1,500 feet below the surface of the water. Some other ocean-going blue-green algae include Trichodesmium. I actually have a sample of them here today, although I don't think we'll be able to see it with this microscope, but they form these interesting tufts, or little groups of cells here that are chain-forming cyanobacterium, and they actually fix nitrogen as well. Another important member is Synechococcus, another very small blue-green algae. And then lastly, Crocosphaera, which is another nitrogen fixer. Now, blue-green algae can be big like an ocean. This is actually a bloom of blue-green algae out in the ocean. This is actually the Trichodesmium. And these blooms can be so big that you can actually see them from space, as pictured here. But what are some uses of blue-green algae beyond fixing nitrogen, providing us oxygen that we can breathe? Well, humans have found that they can be very useful for other things, such as biofuels. And the idea is we grow a bunch of blue-green algae, perhaps in these tubes. This is just one type of structure that people are developing for doing this. Again, it's conducting photosynthesis, so all we need to do is give them light, water, and nutrients, like nitrogen and phosphorus. They produce a lot of different fatty acids and lipids that can then be harvested. That produces some other bioproducts that can be used for other things, which I'll talk about later. And that's converted into a biodiesel, which then feeds your car, which you can drive around. And one of the byproducts of burning fossil fuels, or biodiesel, is carbon dioxide, which then gets sucked up during that photosynthetic reaction by the blue-green algae again, kind of making this kind of more circular production of fuel and burning the fuel. We find blue-green algae in our foods as well. For instance, naked, it actually has spirulina in it. We put spirulina in our shakes. Some people pop tablets of this thinking it has more benefits for them. But one thing I'd like to warn you about, which I'll talk about later, is make sure you know what you're ingesting, because some cyanobacteria actually produce toxins. And there has been some, like if you go to a natural food store, people have actually tested some of those cyanobacterial tablets and found that there's a toxin in there that can harm you. So just be careful and be aware of what you're eating. But spirulina is actually a very safe blue-green algae. It does not produce toxins, so that's a safe one to eat. So I mentioned you can use blue-green algae for a lot of different bioproducts, such as we can harvest their pigments. So in the chloroplast, there's actually different pigments. Pigments are what they use to capture light energy. And you can take those pigments out of the cell and you can use them in biomedicine, food coloring, pharmaceuticals, other cosmetics, and currently this is about a $60 million per year industry. We can harvest their fatty acids for animal feed, such as for feeding fish. Some people are looking into using blue-green algae to produce bioplastics, produce metal nanoparticles such as silver and gold, UV sunscreens, cytotoxic compounds for doing anti-cancer therapy, and lastly, biofertilizers. So there's a lot of uses that people are exploring with blue-green algae. And this is just a list of the different species that they're currently looking at. They're very useful for taking out nutrients, because they need that for growth, such as nitrate, ammonium, and phosphate. But they're also finding that they're good for taking out different toxic metals, such as chromium, or copper, or zinc, or manganese. People are even using it to take out this synthetic pesticide. So they found their way into our wastewater treatment plants as well. So now I'll talk to you a little bit about freshwater blue-green algae. This is what I did my dissertation research on. This is actually a bloom of blue-green algae called Microcystis out in a Canadian lake. But I'll show you a bunch more pictures of these. So just to raise a hands, how many people have gone to a freshwater lake and seen anything similar to this? All right, yeah, so a good amount of you. What you're probably seeing is a blue-green algae bloom. This is becoming a very prevalent thing, both in our country and around the globe. These are just some pictures I took myself, and this is from a colleague out in Taihu, which is a lake out in China. You can see it's an extremely huge bloom of Microcystis, this blue-green algae. It's so thick that actually it'll slow the boat down when you're going through it. Now I'm sure you've seen in the news, this is a satellite image of the blue-green algae bloom in Lake Erie. I think this satellite is actually from 2011, but this year's bloom is actually a very similar size, if not bigger. So what are some negative things about blue-green algae, especially the freshwater ones? Well, dense blooms can decrease light penetration. You can imagine that here you have a very dense bloom of cyanobacteria. It's floating at the surface of the water, but you have kind of benthic plants or plants growing at the bottom of the lake, which are providing habitat for fish and other organisms. They're sucking up nutrients out of the bottom of the lake. So they're having a lot of great ecosystem services. But when you have this blue-green algae bloom floating above, light can't penetrate through that blue-green algae bloom, and so those benthic plants die. And so it creates a poor ecosystem for that lake. And that can also disrupt the food webs. So since there's not a lot of habitat for these smaller fish, the bigger fish don't have any food, they might die off, and it kind of decreases the biodiversity of that lake. And lastly, when those blooms, the very thick scum dies and starts to decay, it'll suck out the oxygen out of the lake, and this can lead to fish kills. We've seen this happen a lot. So how about with regards to human health? As I mentioned earlier, freshwater cyanobacterium produce a lot of toxins. Some of these toxins can affect your neuromuscular system, making you not able to breathe. Some affect your liver and can destroy your liver and cause you to die. And throughout the globe, we've documented waterfowl dying, cattle, dogs, and even humans dying. In fact, one of the first human deaths was down in South America. A bunch of people were hooked up to these dialysis machines down there. They didn't know that the water supply had cyanobacteria in it, producing toxins. They fed that water into the dialysis machines, and a lot of the people died. So currently, the World Health Organization has designated some limits for safe drinking water with a guideline of 1 microgram per liter for one of these toxins, microcystin, which is a liver toxin. And in fact, that level has been breached last year at the Toledo water intake system. That was what was pictured here out in Lake Erie. And so Toledo, Ohio, which served hundreds of thousands of people, had to shut down the drinking water supply. And I'm sure everyone heard about that in the news. There was a lot of worry that that would happen again this year, but they've made some improvements to their filter capability and testing capabilities, and it hasn't happened yet. So these blooms can also have a lot of economical and recreational impacts, such as thick scums may make you not want to swim or boat there. This is actually my hand in a blue-green algae bloom. It wasn't very pleasant. They can emit foul odors. I'm sure some of you have smelled. And the toxins presence can lead to closures for fisheries and other boating activities. For instance, out in East Hampton, New York, out in the east end of Long Island, this is where I did my dissertation work. There's a freshwater lake out there where they actually closed down crab fishing because of the presence of these toxins, which made a lot of crabbers very mad. So we're starting to see these blooms occurring every year in a lot of places. This is a survey done by Toxic Algae News. This is their 2014 survey, in which they went out to every state and asked them, are you seeing these blooms of blue-green algae occur every year? Occasionally, or are you seeing them but you're not monitoring them? And lastly, do they rarely occur? And so they interviewed every state that they could. The ones in gray are the states that didn't respond to their survey. What we're seeing is that almost every state in the union has blue-green algae blooms occurring. And I would argue that those states that didn't respond are also having those occur as well. In fact, I know that Florida has blue-green algae blooms. My old lab has done a lot of research down there, and we've seen them. Well, from a more global perspective, this is a map that was produced in 2005 by Zerwell et al. They were just looking for the presence of this toxin microcystin, which is kind of a proxy for the presence of blue-green algae. And what they found is that mainly they're seeing it in developed countries such as Canada, the United States, Europe, Australia, with some countries in South America and Africa also reporting this. So this year, my colleagues and I decided we wanted to update that map. This map is courtesy of my colleague, Dr. Susie Wood, in which we looked in the literature and saw, well, where do we see a bloom occurring and a toxin event reported where they saw both the cyanobacteria and the toxin produced? Where do we see just the bloom occurring? And where do we see no record at all? So in green are where we see both bloom and toxin. Blue is where we just saw the bloom, and white is where there's no bloom recorded. And what this tells us is that every country almost in the entire world has blue-green algae blooms occurring, and that they're toxic. We only see We saw out of 108 countries surveyed and territories surveyed, we had about 79 that had blooms and toxin, and then the rest were the other two categories. So it's a big concern for not only our country, but for the world as well. So why do blue-green algae blooms occur? Well, if you can kind of just picture this idealized little lake. It's summertime, the happy sun is shining a little light down, the water is warm, it looks like a great happy place to be. We might want to put our sailboat out, do some sailing, some fishing, swimming, and everything seems great. Well, then nutrients enter the picture. And a lot of these nutrients are coming from us, from humans. They might be in our groundwater supplies through septic tank leachage or fertilizers. They might be running off from the surface of the ground through fertilizers, sewage, and industrial runoff. There is some natural component of this, though. There is some remineralization of nutrients from the bottom of the lake. But a lot of the inputs are coming from man-made sources. And so when we have this condition where it's warm water, lots of light, and lots of nutrients, almost always we see a cyanobacteria bloom forming. And so it seems to be that nutrients, light, and temperature are very important factors. In this figure from some other authors, they looked at kind of the succession of different types of phytoplankton in a freshwater lake over the course of a year on the x-axis here. And what you see is that in springtime there's diatoms, and these are very healthy types of phytoplankton, green algae. And then during kind of late summer, early fall, we see blue-green algae being the dominant type of phytoplankton. And so it makes sense, again, that they're blooming in late summer and early fall when the waters are warmest. So what does that mean with regards to global climate change and increasing temperatures? Well, right now, global temperatures are rising, both not only in the sea surface, but also air temperatures. This is just a figure showing temperature anomalies, so changes out of the norm that we record every year for a certain time of year over time. And we're seeing that these temperature anomalies are increasing, and that temperatures are rising beyond what we've normally seen over the past 100 years. So what does that mean for our phytoplankton and blue-green algae specifically? Well, in this figure here, I'm showing you maximum growth rate, so how well these organisms grow, at the range of temperatures here on the x-axis. What we see is the different types of, this is chlorophytes, styloflagellates in red, diatoms in this kind of brownish color, and then blue-green algae in blue. And what we see is that at the higher temperatures, blue-green algae are doing really well. So what this implies is that not only do they like to bloom in summertime and late fall, but as global temperatures rise, we're going to see these blooms occurring at potentially longer time periods. So they may start to bloom in spring and last till early winter. We also may see more intense blooms and more toxic blooms occurring because of this favorability for temperature. They do really well at high temperatures. This is just another representation of that. Here these researchers plotted temperature and depth over time in this lake. Blue colors meaning colder temperatures, red and orange colors meaning hotter temperatures, and then the different types of phytoplankton here on the bottom figure. And what they saw again was higher temperatures led to a dominance by blue-green algae. So in the future, we're expecting that there's going to be not only more blue-green algae blooms, but they're going to persist for longer time periods, and they're going to potentially be more toxic. So rising temperatures also have another effect on the water, in that they're going to cause stratification, so causing more warm water at the top and cold water at the bottom, and that will persist for longer. The blue-green algae are very well adapted to that type of environment where it's stagnant water, and there's this strong thermocline, so cells can't go down very easily. A lot of blue-green algae species have gas vesicles, so they're able to regulate their position in the water by adding air or deflating these gas vesicles. And kind of think about it like you have a balloon inside you, and you pump it full of air and you're able to float to the top, and then you take air out and you float to the bottom. So what that does is that allows them to stay at the surface of the water, absorb light and what they need, then maybe sink down to the bottom at night, soak up some nutrients, and then go back up to the top. And so they do very well in these warm waters that are very stagnant. And it's expected with global warming that we're going to see more of this type of, rather than a well-mixed situation where there's a lot of wind and mixing of the water, we're going to see very stagnant lakes occurring. So it's not easy being blue-green. There's a lot of negative aspects to being a blue-green algae. Currently we're seeing their occurrence expanding globally, as I showed you in that map. They're promoted by eutrophication, or the addition of nutrients, mainly by man-made sources. They're promoted by higher temperatures. They're thinking climate change is actually going to enhance their persistence and timing of when they bloom. And they produce a suite of toxins that are harmful to animals, including humans. There's also some great aspects about blue-green algae. Of the global oxygen supply. They're important as nitrogen fixers, so they're providing nitrogen for our ecosystem. They form all these important symbiotic relationships with other plants, fungi, protists, and sponges. And we're finding a lot of uses for them, such as bioproducts, food, wastewater treatment, biomedical uses, and alternative fuel sources. So how do we, as educators, explore the world of microorganisms such as phytoplankton with blue-green algae? How do we teach our younger generations about that? Well, in the next part of my talk, I'm going to present to you these kits that are available through the Center for Microbial Oceanography Research and Education. These are educational kits for K through 12. My lab currently is one of the host labs for these kits. So if any of you are graduating and you're going to go out to teach, you can feel free to contact us and we can provide them for you. Just about what these kits are kind of centered around is microbial oceanography. That's a study of the abundance, distribution, growth, metabolism, and diversity of microscopic organisms, or microbes, in the marine environment. And what do I mean by microbes? I mean everything from bacteria, including cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, to archaea, which is another type of bacteria, fungi, protists, and viruses. So why do we care? I think I've kind of talked about this already, but just to review, they're everywhere we find microbial phytoplankton in the oceans, in the freshwater, streams, lakes, everywhere. They remove carbon dioxide, produce a lot of oxygen. They form the base of the food chain. So that's kind of the background of these kits. What is CMOR, the Center for Microbial Oceanography Research and Education? Well, it's an NSF-sponsored science and technology center. Its goal is to facilitate a more comprehensive understanding of microorganisms in the sea. They design and conduct novel research, broker partnerships such as with our institution, Lamont Doherty, increase diversity of human resources, implement education and outreach programs, including these kits that I'm going to show you. And then they disperse these kits out to their partner organizations like Lamont Doherty. So the kit I'm going to talk to you today is geared towards K through 12 students. You can go to the CMOR website and learn more about it, but we can talk about it later today. CMOR also provides these science teachers aboard research programs, grants for education in microbial science. So if you're looking for grants, this is a place to go. Then these kits that I'll show you today. This is their website. So there's a bunch of different opportunities here. You can follow scientists on board of research crews if you want. You can play fun games, which I'll talk about. I think I have a couple slides on that. And then the kits and other things. So they do a lot of education and outreach, and we're kind of trying to really strive to push this. These are some great resources for educators. So each of the kits have lesson plans and materials for hands-on science activities in a self-contained format. They actually all fit in these totes down here that I have below here. Wide range of grade levels, K through 12. They provide all the necessary supplies to teach what's being taught in these kits, and they link to state science standards. These are the kits that are available: marine mystery, marine debris, ocean acidification, random sampling, nautical knots and marine careers, so learn how to tie a knot, plankton, ocean conveyor belt, talking about the way water moves around the globe, and then some discussion forums. The two kits that are available at Lamont Doherty are plankton and ocean acidification. So I'll talk about the plankton kit. That's the one I brought today. Again, this is grades 3 through 12. It has 4 lessons in it. Each lesson is about 30 to 45 minutes. In the first lesson, students learn about plankton through a narrated PowerPoint presentation. I can maybe pull up my laptop if anyone wants to look at that. In the second lesson, students design their own phytoplankton. I have some examples of that here, what previous students have designed. The third lesson, students investigate zooplankton with a microscope. I have a microscope here. You can make your own phytoplankton net to capture zooplankton. And the last one, which is geared for grades 6 through 12, is actually an interactive CD, which I'll talk about later. So here's just the slides of that narrated PowerPoint. It's actually quite good. And basically, the students look at it on their laptop and go through each slide and kind of learn everything. I think there's some question and answer sheets as well after they watch this presentation. Then they go on to designing their own phytoplankton. These are some of the ones that we have in our lab that students have designed for us. And they can design not only something that looks very similar to naturally occurring phytoplankton, but they can design their own as well. So it leads to some creativity and learning along those lines. Now, in lesson 3, they actually investigate live phytoplankton and zooplankton under a microscope condition. And that includes all these things within the kit. You can actually go out to your local lake or down to the river, or if you happen to be by the ocean, and collect phytoplankton there to look at. So there's a lot of activities that can be planned around this lesson. And lastly, lesson 4, which is for grades 6 through 12, is that Phytoptopia CD. It does require computers aren't provided. Students use this CD to explore through a virtual microscope phytoplankton. They learn about the different environmental factors that affect growth and distribution. They actually try to see what factors promote a bloom and what cause a bloom to cancel itself out. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't have that to demonstrate to you today, but I'm sure we could demonstrate it to you later if you need it. And then we have that outreach box where there's a lot of activities for all ages and mixed subjects, from looking at physics, climate. So there's this ocean pressure thing that's kind of fun. We use marshmallows for that. Knot time, biology, and chemistry. So looking at pH or different marine microbes. Lastly, these actually weren't my slides, but we can demonstrate any of these if needed. You can, I guess if you're interested in these kits, let me know. I can give you my email address and I can put you in touch with the people that distribute these. And then just some reminders. All the lesson plans that come with these kits are available on the web for free. So if you want to design your own type of activities, just using these lesson plans as a guide, everything is on the web for free. You can be free to borrow these kits anytime from us, just as long as scheduling permits. I think we have it going out 2 weeks from now for about I think 3 weeks to another school. We don't have a shipping budget, so we'd have to arrange somehow for you to pick it up or for us to drop it off. And they're easily tailorable to any type of existing curricular student needs, so they're very flexible. The last thing, which I don't have here to present, is a really cool resource for exploring phytoplankton and oceanography. It's called Yville. This is an interactive virtual world for children to explore, create, and learn together. It's for ages 8 to 15. It's actually a website. You create an avatar, and then you go and explore the world. You can do a lot of math puzzles solved in there. You can protect a coral reef. You can dive into the water in scuba gear. Students have programmed robots. They run their own virtual business if they want to. So there's a lot of activities for children through these learning activities through this website. It has its own currency and clams. It has an economy, a newspaper, so it's an entire kind of little virtual world for students to explore and learn through. This is just the web page, showing you what it looks like. These are some avatars that kids have made. I think it has about 4 million active users right now. And actually, my advisor, Dr. Sonia Diamond at Monterey, she's actually devised a card game to explore oceanography with that's currently on Wideville. And with that, I'll take any questions. I don't know what time it is, but there's time for people to come up and take a look at these kits if you want. I can talk a little bit more about that in detail. You can look at the lesson plans. I did bring some phytoplankton to look at, but unfortunately my microscope is not powerful enough to look at them. So.
Okay, so I know we were talking about like the algae in the water. I mean, doesn't that like pollute the algae?
Does the algae pollute it?
Yeah, pollute the water.
Well, I wouldn't say it necessarily pollutes it. All these phytoplankton and blue-green algae are naturally occurring organisms. They're there. What's polluting the water is us. We're adding nutrients in overabundance to our aquatic ecosystems. And they're just responding to what we're doing. You could look at it as polluting in that they're producing toxins, they're changing the color of the water, making it undesirable to swim in, but it's really a natural occurrence, and it's caused by us. We're actually polluting the water and causing them to respond by absorbing those nutrients and growing. They're just saying, oh, great, lots of nutrients, I'm going to divide some more and make more copies of myself. So it's, I wouldn't call them polluting, we're doing that for you.
Your hand inside of that, is it dangerous if you swim in water without you?
You can have some allergic reactions to it. I was a young scientist and kind of excited, and so I stuck my hand in and grabbed a glop of it. The DEC will warn you not to touch it. In fact, this summer I did some collaborative work in monitoring with them where they were doing some monitoring in New York City. They were testing for toxins in the New York City lakes. And they warned all the people sampling to wear rubber gloves before they took a sample because you can have allergic reaction. If you're swimming in it, you want to be careful not to drink any of the water. Microcystin, you need to drink a lot of it to really hurt yourself. But in some of these lakes, we're measuring toxin levels that, so the baseline for recreation by the World Health Organization is 10 micrograms per liter of this toxin microcystin. We're measuring toxin levels of over 1,000 in some of these lakes. So if you drank a cupful of that, you'd probably be in the hospital. But there are more lethal toxins produced by cyanobacteria where it just takes a little bit and it'll kill you. But thankfully those toxins don't last very long in the environment once they're produced. So, but we have seen like herds of elk out in Colorado go to a drinking water thing that someone had set up for cattle where there was a toxic bloom of the cyanobacteria, and they drank it, and within hours they were dead. There's been news reports about that. So if you see it thick, I probably wouldn't jump in. And if you see like a water fountain, or some municipalities will try to stir up the water by putting a water fountain in the lake and spraying it up into the air, you may want to stay upwind of that, because they have seen that these toxins can be aerosolized and you can breathe them in. And so they've seen that happen with humans as well, where they're recording it within the body after they take a blood test and stuff. So. Yeah. Anyone else? Sure.
So what can we do?
Well, you can, as a homeowner, you can reduce the amount of fertilizer you put on your lawn. If you're near a lake, if your water has lakefront water property, you can put buffer zones along the front between you and the lake to help try to absorb any nutrients that are coming off your lawn. I know, depending on how the lake is managed, you can talk to your local water managers about putting in, they're looking at using barley straw as a way to kill the cyanobacteria blooms. Because there's natural bacteria within a barley straw, hay nail, that can actually cause them to die. You can put in reactive barriers in the ground to try to soak up the nitrogen before it enters the system. There's some chemical means that people are exploring, but I tend to shy away from dumping chemicals in the body of water. A lot of these can be very effective. There's one called Phoslock, which actually uses a rare element to bind phosphorus out of the water. But it's a very new chemical, and we don't have decades of research to know what effect it might have on other organisms. But it works really well, but it's really expensive too. If your home has a septic system surrounded on a sewer system, you can invest in improving the way your septic system works to remove more nitrogen and phosphorus out of the septic system. Maybe get it pumped more often so that it gets taken to a sewage treatment plant to be more properly handled. So there's a lot of things that we can do. We can adjust our lifestyles too. Not demand to have that green perfect lawn. Maybe a few weeds are okay. So yeah.
See if I can identify your friends up there.
Yeah, so I brought some little stuffed animal microbes. Can anyone identify this guy? Bacteriophage. Exactly. Wow. The bacteriophage. So this guy is actually, it's got a very specialized structure. It'll attach onto a phytoplankton like that, and then inject its DNA into the phytoplankton, start replicating itself within the phytoplankton, and then eventually cause phytoplankton to burst and reproduce itself. And there are billions of viruses in a drop of water. So even your freshwater lake, you go in the ocean, you're swimming in the beach, you're surrounded by a soup of viruses and microbes. It's kind of cool. Thankfully, most of those viruses don't affect us. But there's just so many viruses out in the water. It's amazing. It's the soup of genetic material floating around. Does anyone recognize this guy? I presented on him today. It's a blue-green algae, actually. This is actually a heterocyst right here. So, anyway. But yeah, that's all I got today. If you guys want to come up and take a look.
Dr.Harke for showing up today and presenting and really enlightening us in an area that I didn't know a lot about, so I appreciate it so much. And feel free to come up and look at these kits. Thank you all for
Oceanographers get really excited.
So where would I buy these? More?
I can find out. I can find out.